ID confirmed.
Bond. James Bond.
ID confirmed.
Tart.
Caveat. Take a check?
Absolutely, James. Just need some ID. Driver's license to kill, that sort of thing.
Really, 007, you should use a Visa check card. It automatically deducts from your checking account everywhere Visa's accepted. Oh, it's going to explode in 5 seconds.
The Visa check card. Works like a check, only better.
Just joking.
See, tomorrow never dies.
Brosnan's second outing as Bond would take a more modernized spin on the old evil villain characters of the past and their motivations for world domination. This time he's not after any kind of revenge or money or political leanings, but his evil plan essentially comes down to television ratings.
With coverage by all the networks, cable, satellite television, more than 1 billion people will see this event by tonight.
GoldenEye's Martin Campbell was asked to return, but declined. So the directing duties went to Roger Spottiswoode, whose credits included Air America, Turner and Hooch, and Stop, or My Mom Will Shoot. The original title was to have been Tomorrow Never Lies, but supposedly because of some misprint that MGM saw calling the film Tomorrow Never Dies, it was decided that the mistake sounded like a better title. The title is the first to be completely unrelated to anything Fleming. It also becomes the first, for me personally, in a line of weak-sounding titles in the Bond series. For the longest time, I couldn't remember which title went with which film, just because they all sounded so interchangeable. The films had used up most of Fleming's original Bond titles and started to create their own. GoldenEye and The World Is Not Enough do have a connection to Fleming, but when the filmmakers had to come up with ones completely on their own, the results weren't too inspiring. Like, how many times can you incorporate the word die in a title? Fleming's original titles might have been odd and unusual, but at least they're pretty distinctive sounding. Brosnan's second film again tries to update the series by giving Brosnan a different kind of bad guy to face off against. Previously it was 006, and this time it would be a worldwide media baron, Elliot Carver. And while the idea sounds promising and contemporary, I never thought the film reached its full potential with it. The film was the beginning of a template that the Brosnan age would follow until Pierce left the role. A shiny-looking film that starts with an intriguing idea that quickly gets dropped in favor of loud action set pieces, where most are really not all that memorable. It also continues the trend from GoldenEye of giving Bond 2 leading ladies. For the rest of his run, Brosnan would be given 2 leading ladies per film. This film, more than any of the other Brosnan films, plays more like an old-school Bond film. It tries to tick all the boxes in the Bond blueprint. It's got the larger-than-life villain with his huge empire with eyes on world domination, a deadly, indestructible henchman, a gadget-filled car, and a finale that will take place in the villain's hideout that needs being destroyed, along with an aquatic ending. The film starts off with a surveillance on an arms bazaar near the Russian border. Judi Dench's M is following it closely back at MI6, along with British Admiral Roebuck, played by Dench's co-star from As Time Goes By, Geoffrey Palmer. Here we also get our first introduction to Chief of Staff Charles Robinson, played by Colin Salmon. His supporting character will pop back up in the rest of the Brosnan films. He doesn't really contribute much, but he becomes a familiar face. There's another build-up to Brosnan's first appearance. This time I think his reveal is better than it was in GoldenEye. He quickly jumps into action and begins blowing the whole place to hell. Bond has to get this jet armed with these torpedoes out of there before an incoming missile hits the site, or else radioactive disaster. Brosnan's Bond does his signature machine gunning and There's lots of explosions. As the music amps up and everyone back at MI6 are on the edge of their seats. Bond manages to get the jet in the air and does one of his narrow escapes from an explosion. This leads into an aerial sequence as Bond outmaneuvers a co-pilot and an enemy jet. Lots of action. It's not a bad opening, and Brosnan has a nice funny line at the end.
Backseat driver.
The title sequence this time isn't that special, along with Sheryl Crow's theme song. Not too good. I think the song Surrender by Katie Lang is much better. I wish they used it as the main title theme for the opening credit sequence, instead of just sticking it over the closing credits. I think originally this was meant to be the main title song for the film, but then someone had a change of heart, probably realizing having Sheryl Crow perform the main song would be more popular, and she would probably help sell more CDs. It's really too bad. At the start of the film, we immediately see what the villain is up to in the South China Sea. Ellie Carver is instigating a war between China and the United Kingdom by using his stealth boat. If they had waited to make this film a couple years later, I'm convinced Carver would have just been given an invisible boat. By using this encoder, the bad guys can manipulate a ship's coordinates, and no one will realize where exactly it is. They help guide the English Dervisher off course, sink it, blow a Chinese jet out of the sky, and make it look like each one is responsible. It's sort of like a Spy Who Loved Me kind of plan. The graphics of the big drill really help for us to understand what exactly it's doing and how it's moving inside the Dervisher. It helps make the whole sequence much more effective had they not had it at all. Plus, it's a simple, basic way to convey the idea, and the effect becomes an asset to the scene. No big, glossy special effects needed here. Once at the bottom of the ocean, Carver's team goes into the Dervisher thanks to the big hole their drill made, and they steal one of the missiles that they plan to use later. Why is Carver doing this? Apparently China isn't too happy to grant him exclusive broadcast rights there, hoping to eliminate them and having them replaced by leaders that are a bit more receptive to his offer. A war would be a nice solution to the problem. Plus he'll get exclusive headlines for his new satellite news channel too.
Good morning, my golden retrievers. What kind of havoc shall the Carver Media Group create in the world today?
Carver is sort of a Rupert Murdoch, Ted Turner, William Randolph Hearst, Bill Gates kind of figure. His plan is pretty much a version of the famous Hearst quote when he received the cable from Cuba in 1897, telling him there was no war. He responded, "You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war." A quote used in the film, actually.
Great men have always manipulated the media to save the world. Look at William Randolph Hearst, who told his photographers, "You provide the pictures, I'll provide the war." I've just taken it one step further.
It's a fun idea and certainly has a lot of potential to explore the powerful reach of the media and the influence it has on society. The old idea of global domination by past Bond villains is believable and logical in the hands of a character like Carver. So Bond gets the call that something is up, and naturally he's with a chick. This time tangled in some bedsheets with a hot Danish professor. Moneypenny gets one of the best quips in the film here.
You always were a cunning linguist, James. Don't ask. Don't tell.
We get the obligatory mission scene. This time, Bond doesn't get his mission in the usual surroundings of M's stagnant office, but in a speeding car. Kind of a fresh take on it, and it certainly keeps the normally talking head exposition scene a bit more energetic. From here, the film's pace moves pretty quickly. Unlike M's in the past, Dench's M encourages Bond to use sex to get to Carver.
Use your relationship with Mrs. Carver if necessary.
I doubt if she'll remember me.
Remind her. Then pump her for information.
It is kind of strange in this whole new politically correct world Bond now is in, that M is instructing him to get a potentially innocent involved in this whole mess, and is instructing him to just use her.
Because I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur.
Just one film ago, Judi Dench was lecturing him about his bedroom antics, using his charisma to pass that evaluation. Shameful. But using it to stop Carver, that's okay. I guess the ends justify the means, and it all depends on what could be gained from it. If it will benefit the mission and M, then sure, fine, pump away. If Bond's the only one who gets anything out of it, then shame on you. There's rarely any continuity in the films, and I suppose this new mission calls for its own rules. But it certainly seems like they're discarding the relationship they established between Bond and M in GoldenEye already. In the next film, M will go back to warning him against having sex with Elektra. Desmond Llewellyn's Q scene quickly follows, and I think it's better than his GoldenEye one. It doesn't feel as built up as his appearance in GoldenEye. Plus, I always get a kick of seeing Q outside his lab. Instead of long takes of Llewellyn awkwardly reading off the cue cards, this scene is cut in shorter takes. Brosnan and Q have some fun exchanges, and the intro to Bond's new remote-control car and the demonstration gets you really anxious to see when it comes into play. It's such a seemingly simple idea that when I think about it, I'm surprised this is the first time the series ever really used it. Bond uses the standard invitation they wrangled up for him to get into Carver's launch party for his new network. The party is where, of course, Bond will make his formal introduction to the villain, another Bond film staple.
Carver?
Yes.
This is the new banker, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
Bond meets Carver, and tension is quickly felt from some of Bond's remarks. He's not that subtle. Wai Lin, the Bond girl, shows up, played by Michelle Yeoh. Once again, updating of the Bond formula is attempted by this time making the Bond girl much more an independent and strong character than the ladies in the past. Wai Lin is a Chinese agent who probably more than any other Bond girl can handle herself in any situation, and you believe it. Yeoh does the action thing extremely well, and fortunately the film takes advantage of her talents. She's hot, but the film doesn't flaunt it. Her sexiness isn't really touched on. There's some forced flirting between her and Bond, which is awkward since Brosnan and Yeoh don't really have much romantic chemistry between each other. Her and Bond working together is fine, but as for any kind of build-up to a romantic payoff, it just feels like it's forced in because the audience expects it. She's more like a Bond partner than a typical Bond girl.
Don't get any ideas.
I'd never dream of it.
Actually, the best sparks Bond gets throughout the whole film is with that throwaway Danish professor. As for the villain, Jonathan Pryce doesn't make too much of an impression. He's very lightweight. He tries to convey the character's cutthroat ambition, and he has some funny lines, but I never thought he was as sinisterly charismatic as the character should have been. He's the face of this worldwide empire, and he just acts way too hammy and whiny for that. His dialogue is sprinkled with constant reminders to us that he's a media baron and works in the news. But Carver does have a henchman, Stamper. He's a very generic henchman with his blonde hair and intimidating looks. Sure, he's big and strong-looking, but he doesn't make too much of a memorable impression. By the looks of him, Carver could have just picked him up at Henchmen R Us. He's a pretty forgettable henchman. The one thing about Carver as a villain is he doesn't come off very villainous. Classic Bond villains in the past had a ruthless edge to them. They weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. There would usually be a scene of them casually disposing of people by pushing buttons that opened trapdoors, and they would stare coldly as people clung to their last moments of life. And then after he was sure they were dead, he would just go off and casually sip some tea, as if it was just another chore during the day. And Carver doesn't do that. He's given his one scene of how he's got his hand manipulating political figures, but the scene is more humorous than unsettling. He seems very removed from all the villainous acts that are taking place, and he doesn't come off as personally responsible for all the deaths that are taking place. Of course, he's the one ordering his cronies to do all this stuff, and he's ultimately responsible for it all. And because of his high-profile position, it wouldn't be too smart for him to take the chance to be out there with them. But with him just sitting back in the office, getting the latest reports and typing his headlines, it's not really the most dramatic demonstration of him being as dastardly a villain as he should be. It's just like a lot of silly talk. I mean, do something evil. So I never felt excited to finally watch Bond give this guy his due. If anything, I felt a little sad for the guy that Bond gets Carver's wife so easily. Yes, Carver's wife and Bond's former flame, Paris, played by Teri Hatcher. She's terrible. They even have a piano playing in the background to try to goose up this reunion of long-lost lovers. Like, where did it come from anyway? I thought they were just playing some kind of techno music a few minutes ago.
But what about us?
We'll always have Paris.
Bond and Paris's reunion with the clubby lights, it's all pretty bad. Very melodramatic with cringingly bad dialogue.
Was it something I said?
How about the words, "I'll be right back"?
That slap, I mean, it's so ridiculous. Yes, she looks good, but that's about it. You would think that getting to meet an old girl of Bond's, there would be something exciting about the character. There must be something about her that Bond was drawn to. But she's more like a stuck-up, whiny coat check girl Bond picked up in a casino somewhere. She's certainly no Tracy.
That wasn't my plan.
Good. Because if it comes to a choice between you and Elliot, I've made my bed. You don't sleep in it anymore.
This is another thing that starts to happen with the Brosnan films. Stunt casting. At the time, Teri Hatcher was the it girl. Her role in the television show Lois and Clark made her the popular pinup gal for young guys during the mid-90s. She was clearly cast simply because of this. It's too bad no one took into consideration whether her and Brosnan would have any chemistry between them, or if she could really act. I had heard Monica Bellucci tested for the role of Paris, an actress I think would have made much more of an impression in the film. Plus, she seems more of the exotic kind of chick that Bond might have hung on to for a while. Even Celia Ward, who was up for the part of Paris, might have been a better choice. But she didn't get it because the filmmakers thought she was too old at the time. Through the history of the Bond films, Bond girls were mainly new faces. It would be the first time the majority of international audiences had seen them. There were instances when Bond's leading ladies were already known, established actresses. They would play their part and continue on with their careers. But for the most part, landing a part in a Bond movie was the actress's first big break. Sometimes it would be the start of a high-profile career, while other times it would be the first and last time most audiences saw them. And they become best known, or sometimes only known, for their role in that one film. The Brosnan films started using the device of casting name actresses to help sell the film in the US. A position that I don't think seems that warranted. Having the name James Bond on the poster would seem to be enough of a selling point to get audiences interested, at least to me, but I'm no businessman. But the producers would go back to this business line of thinking, casting popular actresses of questionable talent in the rest of Brosnan's films. Hatcher was said to have more screen time than what we've seen in the final film. But apparently after a test screening of it, there was one unanimous agreement from the audience. They didn't like Teri Hatcher. So a lot of her stuff got cut, and it might have filled in some holes with the character and explained why Paris is so quick to betray her husband for Bond.
Because if it comes to a choice between you and Elliot, I've made my bed. You don't sleep in it anymore. Darling.
I didn't realize you knew each other.
Mr. Bond will have a vodka martini, shaken, not stirred.
Oh, we're old friends.
Casual acquaintances. He dated my roommate in Zurich.
So, how do you really know him?
But I've made my bed. I told you I barely know him.
You're a terrible liar, dear.
You don't sleep in it anymore.
Do you think my wife knows?
And you figured you could charm the dirt out of me. I told you, he's a banker. But I've made my bed.
There's a lot of garbage, but if you dial down the ambient noise...
I always wondered how I'd feel if I ever saw you again.
Which means?
She made her bed, yeah. Now she's standing in the doorway. I mean, like 10 minutes. She constantly contradicts herself, and we get no reason or any kind of motivation why. She slaps Bond as soon as she sees him, and then 5 minutes later she's covering for him to her husband. Huh? Anyway, Carver sends Stamper to rough up Bond, and the scene in the soundproof room is pretty good, as Bond silently takes care of the henchman in the background. Naturally, he's triumphant in this encounter. In the old Bond tradition, he still has to embarrass the villain somehow. No trumping him at a card table or winning a golf game, but this time, Bond simply cuts the power to Carver's live broadcast. A simple but effective way Bond one-ups the character and embarrasses the hell out of him. I haven't mentioned Brosnan, and I actually like him better this time around. He doesn't come off as smug, but more confident. He seems a bit more comfortable. He must have done some working out, because he also looks a little bit more athletic to me. Plus, he has a better haircut. Carver sends Paris back to Bond to get information about him. I'm not sure why. He already suspects that she's lying to him about knowing Bond.
So, how do you really know him?
I told you, he's a banker. I met him in Zurich.
You're a terrible liar, dear.
So I'm not sure why he would send her over there. So she could lie more? Maybe he's just testing her to see who Paris would align with, or maybe he's just a complete idiot. I don't know. I don't know what he's thinking. It doesn't make much sense to me. A lot of the Paris part of this film I don't understand. Maybe it's all on the cutting room floor. Paris confronts Bond about why he apparently left her. Again, trying to get into some emotional territory. Paris asks Bond, "Did I get too close?" Which he answers, dramatically, yes. I still don't see what's so special about this chick that would have made Bond so vulnerable and scared. They get it on, and she quickly hops into Bond's bed. Finally, Carver gets confirmation that Paris does in fact know Bond by his techie henchman, Gupta, played by Ricky Jay, who should have had more of a presence in the film. Carver is oddly surprised by this information, even though earlier he already had his suspicions about Paris lying to him about her and Bond.
You're a terrible liar, dear.
I guess his newsman's hunch isn't that sharp a tool. Paris tells Bond about Carver's secret lab, which Bond goes to. He finds Carver's secret encoder, and bumps into Wai Lin. Naturally, Bond runs into trouble, and the action is pretty standard. Once again, a lot of machine gun fire and running around. But David Arnold's music helped make the sequence pretty kinetic and enjoyable. I really wish they would give Bond some better one-liners, though.
They'll print anything these days.
Bond gets an ominous phone call from Carver, and Bond goes back to his hotel room, which leads to my favorite scene in all of the Brosnan age, the encounter with Dr. Kaufman. It's a great little scene as Bond finds Paris dead on his bed, the one part of her role that Hatcher actually plays pretty well. A recorded news report of her death is playing on the TV in the room. This is the only good reason for Paris being in the film, being the sacrificial lamb. She gives Bond information before she dies, but they could have just had Bond discover that on his own anyway. Like right before he turned off the power at Carver's news broadcast, he could have found a note or something saying, "Hey Elliot, dropped off the encoder in the secret lab on the top floor. Enjoy your weekend." Getting the information from Paris wasn't the only way they could have done this in the film. But her corpse, luckily, is the setup for this cool scene. I think it's the best use of the whole powerful media angle that Bond is up against in the entire film, and this monstrous Big Brother reach Carver has. No big wall of TV screens, no giant buildings or antennas, just one small TV screen and a news report. It's a very simple and stylish way to show it, and gets even better as we hear that a dead man was also found alongside her, at which point Dr. Kaufman makes his presence known. Vincent Schiavelli, a very popular character actor, is really good. I still think his German accent is a little too put on, though.
Now, lie down on the bed next to Mrs. Carver.
Sit on the bed, Mr. Bond, yeah?
My name is Dr. Kaufman. I am an outstanding pistol marksman. Take my word for it, yeah?
He and Brosnan are both really good in this tense, funny scene.
My art is in great demand, Mr. Bond. I go all over the world. I am especially good at the celebrity overdose.
Brosnan, for one of the handful of times as Bond, looks to be in really deep trouble, and close to buying it. The way he gets the upper hand is pretty cool, especially since we've already seen him use his phone earlier, but here he uses it in a different way, as more of a weapon. The final line from Brosnan is great, and really harkens way back to Connery's cold-blooded kill in Dr. No.
Wait! I'm just a professional doing a job!
Me too.
It's funny, compared to all the extravagant action scenes with tons of fireworks and epic set pieces the Brosnan films have, this one little scene with two men in a room, ending with one gunshot, is more powerful and memorable than all that stuff. For seemingly such an important character that is the wife of the villain and the old girlfriend of the hero of the story, Paris is pretty disposable. Her death really never causes any repercussions. Everyone seems to just forget about her, and she simply becomes another chick in the long line of sacrificial lambs in the series. In the older Bond films, Paris would have just been played by some hot, anonymous actress.
I hope you extended the same courtesy to Paris.
Actually, Mr. Bond, you're the one who wrote my late wife's obituary when you asked her to betray me.
There's one fleeting mention of her between Carver and Bond, but there really was no reason to make her a past relationship that Bond had had if they're not going to do anything with it. She could have just easily been Carver's wife that Bond had never met before, the first time he saw her at the party. She ends up sleeping with Bond and helping him to get back at Carver for neglecting her or having multiple affairs or not giving her an anchor job or whatever. I think her death could have been used as motivation to create a personal dislike of Bond from Carver for taking Paris away from him. And then you would have Bond wanting to avenge his former flame's death and getting a bit more personal about wanting to stop Carver.
She died of skin suffocation. It's been known to happen to cabaret dancers. It's all right so long as you leave a small bare patch at the base of the spine to allow the skin to breathe.
Someone obviously didn't.
And I know who.
This isn't a personal vendetta, 007. It's an assignment like any other. But if you can't treat it as such, coldly and objectively, the 008 can replace him.
If you're casting the big it girl of the moment, why not do something more with her? Make her more of a vital part of the story. I had heard this one rumor that at one point early on, there was an idea to have Isabella Scrupa's Natalia return in Tomorrow Never Dies, where she would have been in the Paris role. I suppose her satellite expertise and computer knowledge would have been the excuse of her working at Carver's technological mass media empire, and eventually she would end up marrying him. However much of a stretch of logic it might have been, I think it would have been a great idea to have Carver's wife be Brosnan's last Bond girl, and her casting alone would have added more weight and importance to that role in the film. At this point, the Bond films were never really sequels. Continuity of any kind was pretty much thrown aside, and every new film would essentially be its own standalone story. Having a Bond girl return could have been such a great idea. For one, we already knew Natalia. We saw how Bond and her met, followed them on their GoldenEye adventure, and saw them fly off into the sunset at the end of it. Having her return would have been an opportunity to explore questions that the series never addressed since the beginning. What happens next? What does Bond do after he defeats the villain and saves the girl? Does he have any intention of continuing a relationship with them? Does he care for them in any real sort of way? Or is it just one of those two ships passing in the night kind of thing? How does he cut her loose? And how does the Bond girl feel about it? 2 years after GoldenEye, what would Bond and Natalia's feelings towards each other be? The Bond girl has been the target of consistent criticism since the beginning. They're just eye candy, and no real character to them. Just window dressing. Here was an opportunity to really shake things up, and we would have gotten to see Bond face the repercussions of the freewheeling, get the girl, move on to the next one, politically incorrect attitude the series had been known for. They want to talk about this updating of the character, trying to survive in this new era. Okay, so he doesn't smoke cigarettes.
Filthy habit.
They don't have to stop there. There's a lot of things they could explore. Plus, seeing Natalia, a Bond girl we all knew and liked, killed in that hotel room, that would have had a real impact on the audience, and the Bond character for the rest of the film. But all this is just what might have been. For whatever reasons, it didn't happen, and Teri Hatcher ended up being cast, and had her picture prominently displayed on the poster. Alright, that's enough about Teri Hatcher. I just always found her character annoying, and just a lot of wasted potential. I think Paris is a candidate for one of the worst Bond women in the series.
There's odd things about my memories of movies that wouldn't necessarily be what people would think. My memory of that movie was that I was 4 months pregnant when I shot it. And so I had really big boobs.
So after the Kaufman scene, we immediately segue to the fun car chase in the parking deck. This again is pretty classic Bond. It's exciting and a kick to see all the tricks that Bond's BMW has to fend off the bad guys. The whole spin to the classic car chase of having Bond driving from the back seat via remote control is a lot of fun, along with the recurring female car voice.
Driver alert. Obstruction ahead. Reduce speed now.
The music and editing make the sequence pretty entertaining, and it's a genuine high point in the film. Brosnan seems to be having way too good a time so soon after a woman he cared about is killed, though. It looks like he forgot about that dramatic scene already. Yeah, Paris is dead, but this car is fun. Once Bond leaves Hamburg, the film starts to slow up. And that's another recurring problem I have with the Brosnan films. The locations. They always feel underutilized and just not very distinguishing. Typically, the locations are an integral part of the story and are used to set up some unique set pieces. Their surroundings become incorporated into action sequences. But with Brosnan, it doesn't feel that way. It's as if the story and the action could be taking place almost anywhere. Tomorrow goes from London to Germany to Saigon, and I don't remember one attractive, memorable thing about any of those locations. Jack Wade makes a return with his relaxed attitude and his Hawaiian shirt. Bond gets a better idea at the importance of the encoder, figures out where exactly the sunken Devonshire is, and goes to check it out. The skydiving into the ocean's pretty cool. Underwater in the Devonshire, Bond bumps into Wai Lin, who's already way ahead of him. How did she find out where the Devonshire is? Beats me. At this point in the film, I always thought Wai was really starting to show up Bond, and was looking like the better secret agent. Look at their first introductions to Carver. Bond immediately has suspicion cast on him.
I have a problem with a banker.
And gets beaten up by some of Carver's bad guys. While Carver is ready to give Wai a job.
I'm thinking of getting Wai Lin behind a news desk.
Bond breaks into Carver's lab, steals the encoder, alerts the whole building to his presence, and has to kill some guards to get out. But still, Carver knows it was him. Wai casually slips out, seemingly undetected. Bond gets Paris killed. Well, we don't see if Wai gets any of her old acquaintances killed. I don't think so, though. Finally, Bond needs the stolen encoder to find the Devonshire. Wai doesn't have the encoder, but she finds the ship anyway. This is one dangerous thing about teaming Bond up with another secret agent. It's a great opportunity for Bond to team up with a strong woman, where the character is less passive, and they have a reasonable argument for her to go along on the adventure with him, where she can hold her own all the way through. But I don't think you can make her as smart and strong as Bond. It just makes his character less special. Bond has teamed up with other secret agents in the past, and the best ones are when it's been a more balanced relationship. The girl one-ups Bond, Bond one-ups her. 007 is supposed to be the best agent in the world. No one else is like him. He's the only man for this mission, and he's the only one who can stop the villain. That's pretty much gone when he's teamed with another agent who is better than he is. It makes him start to look like an average spy. It's starting to look like M should have just let Wai Lin handle things. Actually, it was kind of a stupid move on M's part to send Bond on this mission. Sending an ex-boyfriend of the villain's wife? I mean, that seems a bit dicey. Bond, you had a relationship with Carver's wife. Pump her for information when you get there. Yes, ma'am. She would play along with your banker cover? You guys parted on a good note, right? Well, kind of. I could send another 00 on this one. Someone that has no connection to anyone that the villain knows? Just go try it, 007. It would seem the risks far outweigh the advantages with this idea. Anyway, Bond and Wai are captured, another classic Bond blueprint component, and they're taken to Carver. Here we get some scenery chewing by Pryce and the threat of Stamper's torture expertise. I had heard there was more of this aspect to Stamper's character. His gimmick would have been torture points on his body would have resulted not in pain, but in pleasure. This was dropped, though, and maybe that idea got morphed into the Renard character in The World Is Not Enough. Bond and Wai make a machine gun escape on Carver's giant banner. I don't know. It's okay. It's not my favorite moment in the film, though. With the bad guys on their tail, it leads Bond and Wai Lin, who are handcuffed together, into the next big set piece, the motorcycle chase. It's a complete reverse of the tank chase, where Bond was pretty much protected the whole time. Here he's on the most exposed vehicle possible. It's not a bad chase. It uses the small village locale with them riding around on the roofs. But it's not one of my favorites, and I certainly don't like it as much as the parking garage chase. This one is more routine, with Bond and Wai getting shot at by plenty of machine guns. Them being handcuffed together is a nice twist to it, though. I also find the chopper blades being used in the crowd pretty stupid. I would think the chopper pilot would think this is a bit too risky for the bad guys to try, and why not just unload some more machine gun fire at them? If they're not worried about killing the civilians with the chopper blades, why not just shoot crazily in the crowd at Bond and Wai? But overall, it's not a bad chase scene. Product placement had become a part of the Bond series for a long time at this point. Bond films are expensive to make, and if you can get some cash by incorporating some kind of product into the film, it could help offset some of the film's budget. Like, I understand that. Hopefully the filmmakers could keep the inclusions of these products somewhat subtle and not be a distraction within the film. For a lot of fans, Tomorrow Never Dies really started to go overboard with this, making the film look more and more like an infomercial. They even stuck poor Desmond in an Avis jacket. Tomorrow garnered the largest product placement deal in history at the time, over $100 million, the entire film's budget. The blatant product placement and promotional tie-ins really bother some fans, while others have learned to live with it. One of the jokes by critics at the time was referring to the Bond films as having a license to sell. Despite having no sexual chemistry between the characters, the film tries to force one upon Bond and Wai in the shower scene. This is the closest they come to any kind of build-up of romance. It doesn't feel right, and I don't think they should have even tried it. I know it's a Bond film, and he's got to get it on with the leading lady, but this time it's just shoehorned in because of the expectations. They were working much better as partners. Michelle gets to show off some of her martial arts skills, which is another high point in the film. At this point in her career, she was already a pretty established star in Hong Kong, but wasn't as well known in the US. This would be her first major introduction to American audiences. She's actually one of the best things in the film. Again, I think she's getting along fine without Bond, and he looks like he needs her more than she needs him. The climax on Carver's boat is pretty much overloaded with action. The now required Brosnan machine gunning and lots of explosions. It gets to the point of overkill. In the older Bond flicks, this is where the good guy army would show up and handle some of the action. During the Brosnan age, though, that never really happens. Brosnan's Bond is literally a one-man army, and he can simply run around killing a ship full of bad guys without any problems. He's more like the Terminator or Rambo, spraying bullets and missiles and whatever else he can get his hands on to kill and destroy. Wai seems more competent with guns with her one-shot move than Bond's chaotic stuff. Carver's ship, by the way, is kind of a bland set for a climax. It's just a lot of generic hallways, and the main space is filled with glass paneling and lots of scaffolding. Again, the staging and geography of where everything is in relation to each other isn't really made that clear. There's definitely an influence of the mid-90s trend in action movies, mainly the Asian action films of the period. Not only is there some martial arts by Michelle, but they both run around doing the John Woo move of using two guns, and there's some attempted arty slow-mo. After Bond and Wai managed to make Carver's ship visible to the Navy, more fireworks result. In the past, Bond would have to work his way up to get to the big villain by going through his henchmen, sort of working his way up through the ranks of bad guys in the finale. Here, Carver seems so inconsequential a villain, there's not that kind of build-up to his death. Bond just gets him out of the way quickly and gives him the drill. For once, I think a more suitable punishment for the Bond villain would have been if Bond just took him in. Having his face plastered on all his own news channels for who he truly is and all the crimes he committed would be a more appropriate punishment for the guy. Remember how embarrassed and angry Carver was when Bond cut his broadcast?
What do you mean you don't know?
I don't know.
You're fired! Get out of my sight!
Or how aggravated he got when Bond insulted his TV shows?
I would have thought watching your TV shows was torture enough.
Save this one till last.
That would be the ultimate payback for this guy. Sitting in a prison cell watching himself be publicly humiliated on endless television channels. This, of course, would venture away from the classic Bond film formula and letting the villain survive, but I think the change could have worked.
Give the people what they want!
Instead, he just gets to dance with the big drill. Finally, Stamper and Bond face off. Stamper seems pretty indestructible as he picks up Bond and tosses him around. You can kind of see shadows of the painless gimmick he has when he barely flinches when Bond stabs him. I always thought it was kind of funny though how getting knifed doesn't seem to affect him, but getting his foot caught causes him great pain. Bond dives out of there before the missile goes off and dives from the explosion. He manages to save Wai from drowning, and Stamper and Carver's boat get blown to hell. Naturally, Bond has to get the girl in the end, and since Wai Lin is the only chick around, he starts making out with her. Even though, like I said, I don't think through the course of the film there was any kind of sexual tension or development between the two in that department. But again, the film sticks to our expectations of how a Bond film should end. Tomorrow would be released on the same day as James Cameron's Titanic. So it would end up being the only Brosnan Bond film not to open at #1 in the US. It grossed a little less than GoldenEye and would be Brosnan's least successful Bond film at the box office. But that still meant it was a huge worldwide hit. As I've said, I have a lot of problems with Tomorrow. It does manage to tick all the boxes on the checklist that we come to expect from a Bond film. It does have some pretty entertaining action, and I guess it can be enjoyed on a generic action film level. I liked Brosnan more in his second time out, but instead of focusing on the potential ideas presented in the film and the relationships between the characters, it took the safe route and spent all its energies on shoot-'em-up action, and not really taking the time to do much else. When Brosnan became Bond, he had signed a 3-picture contract with an option of a 4th film. So soon he would be the 3rd actor in the series to make it to his 3rd Bond film, standing alongside Connery and Moore. Each of their 3rd Bond films had become classics among fans. Would it be the same with Brosnan? With the premise of making the Bond villain for the first time a beautiful villainess who Bond falls for, it certainly sounded like an exciting idea. Once again, only 2 years would pass before Bond would return, and Brosnan would be back wearing his tux.
The distance between insanity and genius is measured only by success.